Hello, it's Eric. It's another great day of recovery. One day at a time. I'm a clinical therapist, a mental health therapist who works with addiction. Had it touch my own life, so I work with it both professionally and personally. And I'm not speaking for any kind of particular 12 step group when I shared these videos, but just trying to carry, well, a message of how to recover. And I do believe 12 steps is where it's at. Not that I don't use other things, but tonight I thought we'd talk about, well, the beginning of sexual addiction recovery. And I think it's important to say that I have a lot of experience with this. And I don't say that in any kind of prideful sense. It's just that I've come to these conclusions from years of working with addiction. So it wasn't like I'm just experimenting. And it's a long year, like 30 years. So here's some of the thing is that I do think that some of us in recovery or some well-meaning therapists think that if I just understand why I have the problems with sex addiction, I won't do it. If I could just understand it, I'll be cured. And that's what we talk about is self-knowledge. And self-knowledge won't save us, it says in this AA book. And we'll talk about why that is. It's not that we don't have any self-insight, but there are, how many people do you know grew up in maybe addictive families and they understand why they used, or their loved one passed away and that's when their drinking took off, or say like in the area of sex addiction, maybe there was sexual trauma, sexual abuse, or parents had broken in relationships there. And somehow I think that we could spend a lot of time in therapy trying to make that go away. And it just, in my experience, it doesn't go away. It goes away when we somehow tap into um, power that is greater than ourselves. And sorry, I started this a little bit too soon, and there's a few things I need to do that's going to be bothering me, which you don't see, is that I had another screen blinking at me, distracting me. Yeah, I'm a busy therapist, which then quick, I had to shift gears to get to this live stream, which I decided to do. So anybody has comments or questions, feel free to leave them because that'll um, help us answer any questions you may have. So if you find yourself beginning to wonder whether you have sex addiction or not, you can go online. You can get a hold of a 12-step group. I just happen to have a Sexaholics Anonymous book here. This is now a white book, but there are questions you can go through to see if this fits. I'll just read a few of them and I'll leave a link in the description. And again, I'm not speaking for SA, I'm just reading out of a book here. It's also called SA, but it says, have you ever thought you needed help for your sexual thinking or behavior? So when there's really not a problem, people never really think about needing to go get help for it. Another question is sex or stimulating things, stimuli controlling you? Do you feel controlled by it? Have you ever tried to stop or limit doing what you thought was wrong in your sexual behavior? Do you resort to sex or some sexual behavior to escape, relieve anxiety, or because you couldn't cope? So there's a sense that any addiction, whether it's sex, gambling, food, overeating, spending, work, helping others, fixing others, alcohol and drugs, is I don't know how to cope with the feelings I'm feeling. So I use this instead. Okay. So it becomes a pattern. People who are addicts don't really just party. I mean, that may be part of the story, but it's actually, this is just a cope. And without it, you begin to detox. You begin to not feel so well, like you just can't cope. This is a big one. Do you feel guilt, remorse, or depression afterwards? Yeah, addiction started off maybe as a solution. It fixed the problem, so we thought. But then there's always a downside. Guilt, depression, self-loathing, embarrassment, shame. The list goes on. Has your pursuit of sex become more compulsive? Like, do you find yourself having to try to do something more on the fringe to get the same effect? Does your sexual behavior interfere with relations with family members, wife, husband, life in general? Some of these get personal and you can read for yourself. But I think this is an interesting one. Does pursuit of sex make you careless for yourself or the welfare of your family or others? Okay, so a lot of addiction has some aspect that somehow I start to become careless and not just not thinking. And I think a lot of underneath sex addiction is a thinking problem. Do I think a lot? I've in other videos shared about the thinking, a thinkaholic. Do I think more than other people? Like pretend that we're going through the questions for drinking and replace the word drinking with thinking. So do I have problem thinking? Does thinking or drinking cause emotional problems? Is my spouse concerned a lot about the level of my drinking or thinking? Do I think alone? Am I embarrassed at the level of my thinking? Do I wake up in the morning waking up with thinking? Do I have trouble stopping after one thought? So early on, then we learn to cope with behaviors that take away this worry, this anxiety. It's almost as if sexual addiction is like an anti-anxiety medicine, that it has that kind of flavor to them. And the problem is, like any addiction, it kind of works and then it doesn't. And then you start to worry more because we may have never really developed an immune system emotionally to be able to deal with life challenges without using some kind of substance or behavior. That's kind of the problem, is that it kind of cripples us. It's like a crutch at some level. And I think the other aspect which is important to realize is, do we lie because of sexual addiction? Do you have a feeling of a double life? So I'll post those there, but a link to Sexaholics or Anonymous. So that's one aspect of the problem. They also have another great reading. It's called The Problem. It says, many of us felt inadequate, unworthy, alone, and afraid. Our insides never matched what we saw on the outsides of others. Early on, we came to feel disconnected from parents, from peers, from ourselves. We tuned out with fantasy and masturbation. We plugged in by drinking in the pictures, the images, and pursuing the objects of our fantasies. We lusted and wanted to be lusted after. We became true addicts: sex with self, promiscuity, adultery, dependency relationships, and more fantasy. We got it through the eyes, we bought it, we sold it, we traded it, we gave it away. We are addicted to the intrigue, the tease, the forbidden. The only way we knew to be free of it was to do it. Please connect with me and make me whole, we cried with outstretched arms. Lusting after the big fix, we gave away our power to others. This produced guilt, self-hatred, remorse, emptiness, and pain. And we were driven ever inward, away from reality, away from love, lost inside ourselves. Our habit made true intimacy impossible. We could never know real union with another because we were addicted to the unreal. We went for the chemistry that had the connection, that had the magic, because it bypassed intimacy and true union. Fantasy corrupted the real, lust killed love. First addicts, then love cripples we took from others to fill up what was lacking in ourselves. Conning ourselves time and again that the next one would save us. We were really losing our lives. Yeah, very well written. It's hard to believe how just one page could encapsulate so much there. How many of us have felt that our insides never matched what we saw on the outsides of others? Yeah. I think the nature of almost all addicts feel that. Perhaps we're pretty sensitive. And maybe from day one, we feel the need to cope with something that would numb us and make us feel just stronger at life. Yeah. Disconnection from parents. And I felt that, not to get into too much of my personal story, but something felt off. And my family never seemed to, I'm not trying to put down my family. My perception of my family never felt like it connected with what I saw in movies and what I saw in the families of others. And some of us may have grown up with domestic violence, physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, and other addictions. And so we may go, well, I don't want to do what they're doing. So then we stuff our feelings. We learn to cut ourselves off from ourselves. And we cope by being strong, not showing a lot of emotion, maybe giving, fixing others, maybe being very other oriented so that we could track what's going on so that we didn't get in harm's way. But then we started to need to use something to cope, and we might have turned to alcohol, we might have turned to drugs, but some of us go, I don't want to go down that path. And so then we find ourselves fantasizing and misusing sexuality to cope. And it may have seemed innocent at first, but then, like any addiction, because every addiction, it's a slide. When you climb up to the slide, you don't think it's really going to go down, down, down to a bad place. We think that, oh, it's not even a slide, and it's not even, we're in denial about it. If we start to slide, we just put our legs out like we're just going to keep ourselves from sliding, and we'll just climb back up and go to safety. And that doesn't necessarily work. I hear a lot from any person with addiction that says, well, when it gets out of hand, I'll stop. So the thing about it is that presupposes you could stop. That's kind of the opposite of step one, which is suggesting that step one says, I don't have control over this, that this is more powerful than me. Keyword is powerful. Where non-recovery is like, no, I'm in full control over this, and I would never choose to do this, this, or this. But like any addiction, we then do this, this, and this. And so we just add it to our accounting list. See, we have kind of a list of why I'm not an addict. Sex addicts would do this, and I would never do that. Or like an alcoholic would drink this much, I would never drink that much. But then little by little, as the disease progresses, we start to do things that we thought we wouldn't do, and then we just change our list to make that acceptable. And so there's a lot of denial, a lot of unawareness. So that disconnection is big. We don't realize that a lot of our loneliness is from the addiction. I would say that once you get sober, and you could almost synonymously use the word connection with sobriety. If people say, I lost my sobriety, they could say, I lost my connection. I lost my connection with the God of my understanding. I lost connection with those around me. I may be walking around and functioning per se, but yeah, that's not connection. And that when one begins to experience and take the steps, and I'm a fan of taking them quickly and effectively in about a 2 to 3 week period. And I didn't always believe that. I wasn't against that. I just never really did it that quickly and didn't realize that that was the normal speed that people did things in the early days of AA. And to slow things down just only brings trouble. And we can talk about that. The guilt, the self-hatred, the remorse, that's kind of the habits. These habits of addiction make true intimacy impossible. Because as you delve into the AA book, you'll see that our real problem is self. That's our real problem, is that self manifested in various ways. Self. So self. Oh, wrong. Sorry. There. There it is. Self is the issue. When I have an inflated sense of self, say like I was to be too upset of making a mistake in front of people, that would be self-obsession. If I need to be perfect, always right, in fact, an inflated sense of self that suggests my understanding of the world is more accurate than the rest of the world's understanding, then I would come across as arrogant and prideful, controlling. I could be very critical, as if I'm the judge of the world. That's our real issue. That's why I think addicts, no matter what kind of style they have, whether it's a substance or a behavior, that's not the most irritating thing about being in a relationship with addicts. It's the lying, it's the control, it's the inflated sense of self, it's all this extra stuff. In fact, let's look at the AA book a little bit here. The AA book, so this is page 52, I believe. And it's in the middle of something, but I'll just say we had to ask ourselves why we shouldn't apply to our human problems the same readiness to change our point of view. And this is after talking about applying 12 steps to our lives. And this are some of the problems. We were having trouble with personal relationships. Well, does that fit? A lot of people. We couldn't control our emotional natures. Now, interestingly, we were using alcohol or sex or food or spending to actually do that. So in this case, sex addiction, we were using that to control our emotional natures. We were prey to misery and depression. We couldn't make a living. We had a feeling of uselessness. We were full of fear. We were unhappy. We couldn't seem to be a real help to other people. Was not a basic solution of all these bedevilants more important than whether we should see newsreels of lunar flight? Of course it was. So what's fascinating is they're comparing this to when people were going to the moon. And so it says, when we saw others solve their problems by a simple reliance upon the spirit of the universe, in other words, God, we had to stop doubting the power of God. Our ideas did not work. but the God idea did. And so there's something very simple about this, almost too simple. It would be like someone saying, so I come to you for therapy. You're telling me that analyzing my childhood, the fact that I had suffered sexual abuse, or I coped with my fears by using sexual behaviors to help myself fall asleep. Can't you give me stress exercises, or can't you stress reduction exercises? Can't you? Is understanding not enough? It doesn't seem to be enough. In fact, I think that kind of therapy can leave people demoralized, that they will feel really bad, like, well, they spend all this money in therapy. And I see it almost every month, people spending a lot of money in therapy and they're not any better, or let alone treatment, not to put down treatment. Sorry, I'm getting distracted by the light. That's funny. I should learn to be less distracted by things and just focus on what I'm doing. Can't have the way the world I want the world. So yeah, the solution is as simple as this: is if one connects with the power of God, it expels the obsession to use lust. And that while therapy can be useful, if the therapy is going to cause kind of self-inflation, it doesn't turn out well. And I'm not talking about self-inflation where a person who has poor self-esteem and they're struggling with self-worth, that isn't something that needs to be healed. But the reality is, because a person struggles with those things, that's the struggle with self. That if we actually get healed by God's grace or God's power, we don't really have the obsession with self anymore. So it's not that I'm a good person. I'm not a bad person. I'm a sick person. I just need to practice these steps, which will humble me. And there's a verse in the Bible, which a lot of 12-step principles come from, that says God gives grace to the humble, but he's opposed to the proud. So grace is power. Humility seems to attract God's grace. When we are down and out, when we're at our lowest, that's when we seem to be able to connect. But when I have everything figured out, I'm strong, I got it, I'm good to go, then I don't need help. So an overview of the steps and how they work is, the first step is we first have to admit that what we're struggling with is a problem. That's probably the first micro step. If I can't admit that it's a problem and that my life is really going to go to a bad place, then I'm probably not ready to take steps, because there's nothing to leave. And people will come to me and want me to help diagnose them. And it's like, yeah, I'm kind of into self-diagnosis. I really believe that it works well to come to your own conclusion that you need help, that we need help. And when you get there, then the next step is to find support and information to get you to the right answers. I believe that that's found in 12-step groups. Yeah. And so assuming you just buy into that, once you get there, you'll see other people with similar problems. There is no crosstalk in meetings. So no one's going to confront you. No one's going to diagnose you. No one's going to, yeah, this is a different approach. You listen to their stories. And by listening to their stories, and hopefully they're not war stories, but they share a short story of what was it like to have the problem and then what they're like now. And if you go, I want this, I identify. And when first coming to meetings, it's easy. If you're not ready, you'll contrast, you'll compare, you'll kind of go, I don't have this. I don't have these problems. So then you could easily leave. But if you identify with what does fit, you'll probably determine sooner than later to get well. And say like, well, Eric, what if I'm over identifying and I really don't have the problem and I'm tricking myself into the problem? I don't think that'll happen. I think that if you identify with a few of these things, or just a few of the struggles sex addicts struggle with, you'll be on your way. But I can tell you more often than not, people will say, well, they went to a meeting and then they realize, well, they're not cross-dressing, or they're not sleeping with prostitutes, or they're not voyeuring, or they're not doing this, this, and this. And with all due respect to the people that struggle with those things, most people just struggle with pornography and masturbation, and they're somehow misusing sexuality. And I think what people find is that once you get into the program and you start getting sober, whatever your problem was begins to go away. That's the amazing thing. You could spend years in therapy trying to figure out, why do I do this sexual behavior? And I've heard all kinds of different sexual behaviors, and it's all pretty much the same, really. They have maybe different consequences, different levels of embarrassment, but the reality is that I'm not sure. Sometimes you can look at childhood history and go, well, that's why. But sometimes you just can't. And I think that there's some time wasted trying to figure out, how did I get here? Like a person, I have a mild dry throat here in just a minute. We have lots of smoke where we are, and so I'm just getting drier by the minute. That's better. So I was going to use a sore throat metaphor. If a person struggling with a sore throat, they go to the doctor, and the doctor spends all this time trying to figure out, well, how did you get the sore throat? There may be some value to doing something that causes sore throats, but the reality is sometimes we just need to fix the sore throat. And in Alcoholics Anonymous, they say the reasons why we drink are unimportant. Yeah, because you could drink when you're happy, when the sun's shining, when it's raining, after a loved one passes away, or it's a variety of reasons, and you could spend a lot of time of your life experimenting, wasting on that. So, so going to meetings is important. You'll learn to identify what fits. I would bring some money, sometimes to bring cash so that you can buy literature. But a lot of meetings are online these days. And I would just get some books. I would get the basic text. I definitely would get this book, Alcoholics Anonymous. And I would start and you can follow any of the other videos, but just underline what seems to fit, and replace the word where it says alcohol with lust or drinking. Replace it with sexual addiction, or lusting, or lustful looking, or whatever it is. You'll find yourself going, wow, this is more about a personality issue than it is, a lifestyle, than it is about the sexuality. If I drop dead, and I tell this to people all the time, just try to look in this book and see what it's saying to do. If you read it with just gonna put head knowledge in there, it doesn't work. But think of it like a cookbook or an instruction manual. So when we go through this together, you'll look for, what is it telling you to do, and then just do that. And I myself, that sounded very arrogant. Sorry about that. It probably is. But after all these years of recovery, I guess what I'm saying is I still will struggle with just thinking. Actually, that's the thing, rather than doing. So prayer, in some ways, is the opposite of thinking. Surrender in some ways is the opposite of thinking and worrying. And this book will talk about how to surrender. And we'll talk about that, how to surrender. What does that look like? So the problem, one needs to know just a little bit about the problem to get better, but really I tend to focus on the solution. I think that there's a lot of value in just looking at the solution. So let's talk about the solution. The solution is not steps, actually not meetings, not loved ones to support you, not more information, and there's a lot of other treatments. I use EEG biofeedback, works really well. I love it. I love stress management. I love relaxation exercises. I love good sleep. I love good nutrition. I love exercise. Well, exercise I love after it's over. I actually like it when it's happening too, when I'm doing it. But those things will not make one sober in my experience. I see it as having to be God. It just has to be God that helps me stay sober. And hold on, boy, I'm running around today. So I have a lamp here. This is a tertiary lamp, as they call it. So I'll kind of represent this as God, the God of my understanding, okay? Yeah, let's do this. So it's as simple as this, that when I'm holding on to God, I am safe. I am good to go. I am fine. I have everything I need to live this life, to be okay, to be safe, to be loved. I have courage for the future. I have power. Okay. So this is my addiction. And this is lens cleaner. For glasses and stuff. There's probably alcohol in here. And so this is my addiction. This is the precious. This is what I need to cope when I'm an addict. I don't know how to go to God. I don't know how to go to people. I go to it. Okay. And I don't even think that this little thing is controlling me, but it is. If I set it down somewhere, my eyes are always drawn to it. I always wonder about it. When's the next time? I mean, there's many years since I've experienced this by God's grace, but when's the next time when I can use this? And when is there free time? And if I'm not using this full strength, I'm just remembering it, okay? And the delusion is I really think I'm in control, that I can really stop any time that this is not going to become more powerful. In fact, this is alcohol, okay? And so I start to use these things and they start to use me. And now I'm just going to kind of let go of it. And I'm going to try to let go of it with knowledge, with therapy. And I sound like I'm repeating myself, which I am, but I'm just going to somehow try not to do this. And what 12 steps is if I hold on here, it's gone. That's how easy it is. But a lot of people really de-emphasize God in this because we don't want to make waves. And so I'm just going to focus on this and try to back away from it. And I can get some ground. I could maybe go a few days, a few months, even a year. But if I've never really learned to cope any other way, when something big happens, then I'm just going to go back to this. Or I just go to small amounts of it. Okay. But all of the steps basically do is help us connect with God. Because if there is a battle between the God of my understanding is God created the universe. He knows everything, everything. He knows the past. He knows the future. He is with me in the present. He has all power. Think about universes and galaxies. Okay, it goes on and on and on. Think about the intricacies of human emotion or the brain or digestion or parts of the body or parts of the world that remain even yet unexplored. And I believe technology is gifted to us by God. That why did not the ancients have this technology that we have today? What's going on? Like, why is technology just taking off like a rocket? Kind of pun intended. There's something going on that guides the universe instead of just us. And another thing that causes me to really wonder, how can God not be here, is the thing is that it's my mother's birthday, and I got a little thing from my sister there. A little photo, thanks to notifications. If God is, well, let's go this direction. A explanation for a lot that's gone on in the world, all the unrest, the wars, the pandemics, I mean, just all kinds of craziness. Is this just as good as it gets with us being evolved and our technology? We have a lot of, it appears to me, moral issues that are the problem. And there seems, and if one reads this book, you're going to find that, my gosh, this is kind of like relating to what's going out there in the world, people not getting along, people not able to even listen. Perhaps there is a lower power, perhaps there's addictive lower powers that are greater than me, that are guiding things, my selfishness or my greed or my fears, taking me for a ride. Dishonesty. It says the truth will set us free. And I think that when we come to truth about ourselves, how paradoxically is this? Is that people have spent thousands of dollars. And again, it sounds like I'm putting down treatment centers. This is just my experience, is that they spent $60,000 on treatment and they get out and they use again. I introduce them to this book, which is $14, and they start experiencing the steps and they get better. Or people who have been in 12-step recovery for sex addiction. And I just talk about what my experience is with the simplicity of these steps. It's as simple as this. I need to connect somehow here. So let's talk about the steps. The steps, step one is admitting powerless over this, and my life is unmanageable. So when I come to the conclusion, this is going to hurt me, it's not enough just to admit it to make it stay away, because there's some pleasure aspect and there's some spiritual force. I don't have the human willpower to be able to just say no. That was a funny saying some years back, that the government just said, hey, just say no. I have an idea. Why don't they say no to their problems? You know, how blinded is that? I know that there may have been good intentions, but with addiction, just to say no doesn't work. So step two is to come to believe that there's some power greater than myself that will restore me to sanity. Not much is required there. Let's just start with a power other than ourselves. And I'm not a fan of people saying my group is my higher power. Did the group create the universe? Does the group know everything and that there is to know? Does the group have all power to say, to give you power to say no? No, I don't think so. In the AA book, it says that three things became clear In fact, this would be a good share here. Let's get to that section here. 3 things became clear: that we were alcoholics, or in this case, sexaholics. Three things became clear. A, that we were sexaholic and could not manage our own lives. B, probably no human power could have relieved our sexaholism. And that C, God could and would if he were sought. Being convinced that we were at step 3 is that we decided to turn our will and our life over to the care of God. Just what do we do? What do we over to God as we understood him? Just what do we do by that? And just what do we mean by that? And just what do we do? The first requirement is that we be convinced that any life run on self-will can hardly be a success. Okay. On that basis, we're almost always in collision with something or somebody, even though our motives are good. Most people try to live by self-propulsion. Each person is like an actor who wants to run the whole show, is forever trying to arrange the lights, the ballet, the scenery, and the rest of the players in his own way. If his arrangements would only stay put, if only people would do as he wished, the show would be great. Everybody, including himself, would be pleased. Life would be wonderful. In trying to make these arrangements, our actor may sometimes be quite virtuous. He may be kind, considerate, patient, generous, even modest and self-sacrificing. On the other hand, he may be mean, egotistical, selfish, and dishonest. But as with most humans, is he not likely to have varied traits? What usually happens? The show doesn't come off very well. He begins to think life doesn't treat him right. He decides to exert himself more. He becomes on the next occasion still more demanding or gracious, as the case may be. Still, the play does not suit him. Admitting he may be somewhat at fault, he is sure that other people are more to blame. He becomes angry, indignant, self-pitying. What is this basic trouble? Is he really not a self-seeker even when trying to be kind? Is he not a victim of the delusion that he can wrest, or in other words, wrestle satisfaction and happiness out of this world if he only manages well? Is it not evident to the rest of the players that these are the things he wants, and do not his actions make each of them wish to retaliate, snatching all they can get out of the show? Is he not, even at his best moments, a producer of confusion rather than harmony? Selfishness, self-centeredness, that we think is the root of our troubles. Driven by 100 forms of fear, self-delusion, self-seeking, and self-pity, we step on the toes of our fellows and they retaliate. Sometimes they hurt us seemingly without provocation. But we invariably find that at some time in the past, we had made decisions based on self, which later placed us in a position to be hurt. So our troubles, we think, are basically of our own making. They arise out of ourselves. And the sexaholic is an extreme example of self-will run riot, though he usually doesn't think so. Above everything, we alcoholics must be rid of this selfishness. We must, or it kills us. God that makes that possible. And there often seems no way of entirely getting rid of self without his aid. Many of us had moral and philosophical convictions galore. We could not live up to them even though we would have liked to. Neither could we reduce our self-centeredness much by wishing or trying on our own power. We had to have God's help. This is the how and the why of it. First of all, we had to quit playing God. It didn't work. Next, we decided that hereafter in the drama of life, God was going to be our director. He is the principal. We are his agents. He is the father, and we are his children. Most good ideas are simple, And this concept was the keystone of the new and triumphant arch through which we pass to freedom. So, very powerful. I would say that that's probably a good description of what the addiction really is about. It's really about this inflated sense of self that wants to run the show and really has a script for the world. And we want the world to behave the way we want the world to behave. We want to control the world to our liking. It's as simple as this: if I don't get what I want, I'm mad. If I'm afraid I'm not going to get what I want, I'm fearful. And if I'm still mad, I was going to say mad because I didn't get what I wanted, I'm resentful. So that's the nature of this self-inflation. And then when I don't feel like life is treating me right after I've been so kind, considerate, patient, generous, modest, self-sacrificing, or I start to get mean, egotistical, meaning edging God out, ego, edging God out, and dishonest, I start to go, you know what? I'll tell you what you need to know. Just kind of make up my own reality. Guess what? This starts coming back in to my life. And so what blocks me from God's power? All that stuff. That God loves me, he can help me, but he's not going to wrestle with me with my own life. So I voluntarily surrender it when I am down and out and realize I have no more good ideas. I'm at the end of myself. I'm done. That's a good place for recovery. And that is where it says we have to be convinced that any life run on self-will can be hardly a success. And we also learned that there is a delusion that I can rest or wrestle satisfaction and happiness out of this world if I only manage well. And so that's not true. There's a certain truth to it. If I'm an athlete or a musician or even a therapist, studying and working hard helps. But it doesn't guarantee that bad things or seemingly bad things could happen to me. And so then what happens is if I have a simplistic view of the world and something so-called bad happens, then I flip out. And so then I go back to exerting myself more. And I really am a producer of confusion rather than harmony. People start to get selfish back. And then they start to maybe get codependent with me and start to try to pull it out of my hands. And so the more they try to control me because they're a director who wants to run the whole show, welcome codependent to the scene. And which came first, the chicken or the egg? I think that a lot of us addicts were codependent before we were even addicts. That's another story in another video, but this need to be in control. So step 3 is like letting go of control. This book has beautiful phrase in it that says, many of us, though, felt we would step off the edge into oblivion. But instead of surrender killing us, it killed the obsession. That's not an exact quote, but that's the nature of step 3. So back to step 2, in the AA book, it says that in, I think it's page 44, they only show the page numbers is an encouragement to try to find that section of the book. Because if you give anybody at the beginning, a lot to read, a lot to write out, that's not helpful in my experience. It really isn't. That's why I believe in reading it to people. But page 44, if a mere code of morals and a philosophy of life were sufficient to overcome sexholism, many of us would have recovered long ago. How many of us had that? How many of us felt like this was morally wrong? I feel so guilty. Just stop. Just say no. But we found that these codes and philosophies did not save us, no matter how much we tried. We could wish to be moral. We could wish to be philosophically comforted. In fact, we could will these power. We could wish to be moral. We could wish to be philosophically comforted. In fact, we could will these things with all our might, but the needed power wasn't there. Our human resources, as marshaled by the will, were not sufficient. They failed utterly. Lack of power, that was our dilemma. We had to find a power by which we could live, and it had to be a power greater than ourselves, obviously. But where and how were we to find this power? Well, that's exactly what this book is about. Its main object is to enable you to find a power greater than yourself, which will solve your problem. That means we have written a book which we believe to be spiritual as well as moral. And it means, of course, we're going to talk about God. And then it goes into a beautiful section talking about, well, what if we struggle with believing in God? And so I'd encourage you to get a book and read it if you think you struggle with sex addiction. I'm planning on spending more time devoting time to this channel, but we have another channel. The other channel is Eric Bolland, MA. I'm going to type it here. You look up, Eric Bolland, MA. That's loaded with lots of stuff on addiction. Oh, we'll leave a link in the description area. Never really thought of doing that. We post things probably sometimes twice a week on anxiety, depression. But this channel is just devoted to sexual recovery. We also have a website you can visit us on. I think it's a good stopping place for tonight. But I plan on kind of going through the steps and then also talking about things like what to do with relapsing and what to do when we have relationships that are troubled, or what if we have such problems with mood going on? Like, what if we have co-occurring issues like not only sex addiction, but we're really bipolar, or we're suicidal, or we have depression? What if we have multi-addiction, like we're sex addicts, but we're also shopping and overeating, or we're doing drugs and alcohol? Well, we'll talk about that. So anyway, well, I wish you a great day of recovery. Feel free to like and subscribe. I'm glad I'm human. I'm glad I'm able to not take myself too seriously. If anything you find is useful, great. Let us know what we're doing well. If there's things that wasn't useful, let us know that as well, because we want to improve. And you take care, and we'll see you later.